A little girl with only $5 was trying to buy a cake for her mom when a single father saw her and recognized something familiar in her face. What happened changed their lives forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment where you are watching from. The bustling streets of Brooklyn created a typical urban symphony on a Friday afternoon. Amid the chatter of pedestrians and the constant roar of engines, Sweet Delight Bakery stood out as an aromatic refuge, its display cases filled with artisanal cakes and treats that delighted even the most discerning New Yorkers. The scent of Belgian chocolate and Madagascar vanilla wafted through the slightly ajar door every time someone entered or exited, mingling with the characteristic smell of coffee that permeated the bohemian neighborhood. Richard Anderson adjusted the cuff of his Italian dress shirt and checked his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. At 42, he had turned obsessive punctuality into a personal religion. And that 15-minute delay for the meeting with the architect responsible for the renovation of his 5th restaurant left him visibly irritated. His graying temples and impeccably tailored suit betrayed a man accustomed to absolute control, someone who had built a culinary empire based on the millimetric precision of every detail. "Next in line, please." Mrs. Johnson's warm voice echoed from the counter. She had been working at the bakery for 15 years, knew every regular customer by name, and had the gift of turning a simple purchase into a welcoming experience. Her curly hair already showed some grey strands, and her calloused hands told the story of someone who woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare the delights that adorned the display cases. It was then that Richard noticed the girl. She couldn't have been more than 7, with dark brown curly hair tied in 2 messy pigtails and a light blue dress that had seen better days. Her small hands clutched a handful of American coins as if they were the most precious treasure in the world, counting and recounting each one while stubborn tears streamed down her rosy cheeks. "Ma'am, I really need a very pretty cake," the girl whispered to Mrs. Johnson, her voice carrying a seriousness that didn't match her age. "It's for my mum's birthday tonight, and she will be so happy. I have $5 here. Can I buy something really nice?" The child's accent intrigued Richard. There was something different in her pronunciation, a peculiar mix between English and something he couldn't quite identify. She spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully, as if mentally translating before speaking. Mrs. Johnson crouched down to meet the girl's eye level, her maternal heart tightening at the touching scene. "Sweetheart, tell me your name first. What's your name?" "Sophia," the child replied, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Sophia Almeida. And my mom's name is Letitia. She works a lot, you know. In the early morning, she goes to clean some big buildings downtown, and when she comes back, she's always very tired. Today is her birthday, 30 years old, and I wanted to give her a really special surprise." Richard felt something strange stir in his chest, a long-forgotten sensation that made him take an involuntary step toward the counter. Sophia's dark, determined eyes reminded him of someone, a distant memory that stubbornly lingered in the shadows of his mind. "Let me see what we have here." Mrs. Johnson examined the American coins carefully. "It's $5, which is about $25. Look, sweetie, the large cakes cost much more than that, but I'm sure we can find something special for your mom." "No, no!" Sophia shook her head vigorously, her curls dancing with the movement. "It has to be with my money. Mom always says we have to pay for things with our own effort. She will be upset if she knows someone gave me something for free." The determination in the girl's voice reminded Richard of his younger sister, Emily. She had the exact same sweet stubbornness, the same ability to turn principles into unwavering convictions. His heart ached as he recalled their last argument 9 years ago, when Emily decided to study abroad in the United States against the family's wishes. Listen here, young lady. Richard approached the counter, his naturally authoritative voice softened by unexpected tenderness. How about I buy the cake you want for your mum? It wouldn't be a gift, it would be like a loan. You can pay me back when you have all the money. Sophia studied him with serious eyes, evaluating his intentions. You're kind, but I can't accept. Mom works hard to earn our money, and she would be sad if she knew I accepted a favor from strangers. She always says we owe nothing to anyone. And your mom is absolutely right, Mrs. Johnson intervened, touched by the child's precocious wisdom. How about this, Sophia? We have some individual muffins over there on the corner shelf. They are small, but they are made with a lot of love. With your $5, you can take 2 really nice ones, and I can make a special gift wrap. What do you think? Sophia's eyes lit up like stars. Muffins. Mom loves muffins. When we were little. She hesitated, as if she had almost revealed something she shouldn't. She always said muffins are the happiest food in the world because they fit perfectly in our hands. Richard furrowed his brow. There was something strange about the way the girl spoke, references that didn't quite fit. Where did they live before? Why was a child carrying American dollars? And most importantly, why those gestures, that way of furrowing her brow? When focused, they seemed so familiar to him. Then it's decided, Mrs. Johnson clapped her hands. I will choose the 2 prettiest muffins in the shop, and I will even put a special candle for your mum to blow out. It's going to be a wonderful birthday. As Mrs. Johnson carefully prepared the package, wrapping the muffins in pink crepe paper and tying it with a golden ribbon, Richard couldn't take his eyes off Sophie. The little girl watched every movement with absolute attention, biting her lower lip in concentration, another gesture that felt strangely familiar. All set, dear. 2 chocolate muffins with strawberry frosting wrapped with lots of love. Mrs. Johnson handed the package to Sophie, who received it as if it were the most valuable gift in the universe. Thank you so much, Mom. You are very kind. Sophie counted the coins one last time before handing them to Mrs. Johnson. Mom will be so happy. She said that when I do something nice, it feels like her heart is full of colorful butterflies. Richard watched the girl leave the bakery with careful steps, holding the package like a treasure. She stopped at the door and waved to Mrs. Johnson before disappearing into the crowd on Harmony Street. At that moment, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He needed to find out who that child was and why she had stirred his dormant emotions so deeply. The 15-minute encounter had transformed into something much larger, planting a seed of curiosity that would grow into an obsession. The 2 weeks following the meeting at the bakery turned into a strange routine for Richard Anderson. For the first time in his adult life, he broke his rigorously planned professional commitments to make a technical stop at Sweet Delight Bakery every weekday, always between 15:30 and 15:45 in the afternoon. His partners began to comment on this new eccentricity of the boss, but no one dared to question him directly. "Mr. Richard, you've been acting a bit different lately," commented Mr. Thompson, the driver who had been with him for 8 years, as he parked the black Mercedes in front of the bakery for the 10th consecutive time. Every day stopping here, looking around as if searching for someone. "Is everything okay?" Richard adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he had recently developed. "I'm just checking out the competition, Thompson. It's important to know what other establishments are doing in the food industry." The lie sounded false, even, to his own ears. But Mr. Thompson, experienced in the art of being discreet, simply nodded respectfully. He knew his boss too well to realize that something was deeply affecting the man who had always been a closed book. Inside the bakery, Mrs. Johnson had already noticed the pattern. The elegant businessman appeared religiously, always ordering the same thing, a double espresso and a sugar bread, consumed in silence while he observed the activity and then left without haste, always looking at the surrounding streets as if waiting for someone. "Good morning, Mr. Richard." She greeted him with a knowing smile when he entered on Thursday afternoon. The usual, "Please, Mrs. Johnson." Richard settled at the corner table, the one that provided him with the best view of the entrance and the street. "Tell me something. Do you remember that girl who was here 2 weeks ago, the one who wanted to buy a cake for her mum?" Mrs. Johnson's sharp eyes sparkled. She had been waiting for this question since the first time he returned. "Sophie? Of course, I remember. Beautiful girl, very polite. Why do you ask?" "Curiosity," Richard lied again, stirring his coffee with mechanical movements. "She reminded me of someone. Has she come here other times?" "Oh yes, she has been coming here since they moved to the neighborhood. It must be about 3 months, always with small but exact amounts for what she wants to buy." Mrs. Johnson leaned in, lowering her voice. "Poor thing, you can see that life isn't easy. Always in the same clothes, a bit too big for her little body, but clean and well kept. Her mum must be a hard-working woman." "And do you know her mum?" "Not personally, but Sophie always talks about her with such affection." Mrs. Johnson wiped her hands on her apron, organizing her thoughts. "The girl has a different way of speaking, right? As if she learned English somewhere else. And she always carries these American coins, never regular Brazilian money." Richard almost spilled his cup. "American coins always?" "Always. Sometimes they're quarters, sometimes nickels, always counted just right for what she wants. Once I asked where she got so much American money, and she said her mum saved it from before, when they lived far away. She didn't want to give more details." Richard's heart raced. A Brazilian child with a strange accent, carrying American dollars and talking about living far away. The pieces of a puzzle began to form in his mind, still too confusing to make complete sense. "Mrs. Johnson, would you know where they live, or where her mom works?" The baker's expression became cautious. "Look, Mr. Richard, you seem like a good person, but I don't usually give out information about customers, especially about a child. If you don't mind me asking, why so much interest?" Richard hesitated. How could he explain that this girl had awakened in him an inexplicable need to protect, to understand, to be near? How could he tell that 9 years ago he had lost contact with the only family he truly loved, and that something about this child painfully reminded him of his sister Emily? "The truth is that—" He took a deep breath. "She reminds me a lot of someone in my family. Someone we lost a few years ago. I just wanted to make sure she's okay, that she doesn't need help." The sincerity in Richard's voice touched Mrs. Johnson's maternal heart. "I understand, dear. I will let you know. To share what little I know, Sophie always mentions that her mom works cleaning buildings in downtown at night. They leave home very early because the girl stays at school in the morning, and her mom needs to sleep in the afternoon to handle the night shift." "And do they live around here?" "From what I understand, yes. Sophie always walks here, and once she mentioned it only takes her 5 minutes to get here. It must be on one of the nearby streets." Richard mentally noted each piece of information. Night cleaning work downtown was concrete data, something he could investigate. As the owner of a restaurant chain, he had contracts with several cleaning companies. Would it be possible to find an employee named Lisa Anderson? "There's one more thing," Mrs. Johnson continued, lowering her voice even more. "The girl always talks about a special uncle who lived in a big house with a rose garden. She never explains who this uncle is, but from her eyes, he must be someone very dear. Sometimes she gets a bit sad when she talks about him, as if she misses him." Richard's blood ran cold. A big house with a rose garden. Only one property fit that description: the country house of the family in Lakeview, where he and Emily spent weekends as children. and where she loved to pick roses to adorn her hair. The place she always said was her little piece of paradise. This uncle, Richard had to swallow hard to ask. Did Sophie say what he was like? Tall, short, young, old? Not many details, but once she mentioned he had hair the color of coffee with cream, and that he always wore important clothes, and that he taught her about sea animals because she is passionate about dolphins and whales. Richard's hands trembled slightly. Emily had studied marine biology. She was a specialist in aquatic mammals and always said she would live near the ocean one day to study whales. And the hair the color of coffee with cream, it was exactly the color Emily said her own hair was. "Mrs. Johnson," Richard stood up abruptly, leaving a $50 bill on the table. "If Sophie shows up today, could you tell her that a friend of her special uncle came by looking for her? A friend who cares a lot about him and would really like to get to know her better. Of course, dear, but don't get too excited. The girl is quite wary of strangers, just like her mum must have taught her." Richard nodded and left the bakery with hurried steps. Mr. Antonio immediately noticed the change in his boss's expression when he got into the car. "Where to now, Mr. Richard?" "To the office, Antonio, and as soon as we arrive, I want you to get me the list of all the outsourced cleaning companies that service our restaurants. All of them, without exception." During the drive, Richard couldn't stop thinking. If his suspicions were correct, if Sophie was indeed connected to Emily in some way, it would change everything. But how could a Brazilian child be connected to his sister, who had disappeared in California 9 years ago? Arriving at the office, Richard locked himself in his office and began making calls. First to HR, requesting information about outsourced employees, then to the private investigator he occasionally used for business matters. He needed to find Lisa Anderson, and he needed to do it quickly. While waiting for responses, Richard opened the locked drawer of his desk and took out an old picture frame. The photo showed him and Emily at the country house in Lakeview, she at 18 holding a bouquet of white roses, he at 27 hugging her from behind, both smiling genuinely at the camera. "Where are you, Emily?" he whispered to the photo. "And what does Sophie have to do with all this?" The afternoon stretched on, and Richard knew his search was just beginning. The early hours of Monday found Richard Anderson in his office, surrounded by piles of contracts, employee spreadsheets, and reports from cleaning companies. His wrinkled clothes and unshaven face betrayed a sleepless night, entirely dedicated to finding a needle in the haystack named Lisa Anderson. The private investigator, Charles Henry, had worked all weekend and finally managed to gather some concrete information. "Mr. Anderson," Charles knocked on the door at 6 in the morning, carrying a brown folder that seemed to contain important secrets. "I located the employee you were looking for." Richard lifted his bloodshot eyes from the paperwork, his heart racing. "You found her? Lisa Anderson?" "Exactly. Lisa Christina Anderson, 28 years old, employee of Total Clean, which services 3 of your restaurants downtown." Charles opened the folder methodically. "But there are some interesting details about her that you need to know." "Go on." Richard leaned forward, every muscle tense with anticipation. "Lisa has been working the night shift for exactly 2.5 years. Before that, there are no records of her in New York. It's as if she appeared out of nowhere in January 2022. No prior professional history in the city, no references from previous jobs." Richard frowned. "That's strange. And before New York, where did she come from?" "Now it gets interesting." Charles turned the page. "I managed to trace that she returned to Brazil from the United States in December 2021. Direct flight. Flew from Los Angeles to JFK Airport, accompanied by a 5-year-old minor. Immigration documents show she declared permanent return to the country of origin for family reasons." Richard's blood ran cold. Los Angeles, California, exactly where Emily had gone for her exchange program. And the child, is there any information about her? Sophie Anderson, born in Los Angeles in 2017. Father not declared on the birth certificate. The legal mother is Lisa Anderson, but... Charles hesitated, as if the next piece of information was particularly delicate. But what? Richard asked. He stood up, unable to remain seated. The American documents show some inconsistencies. Lisa legally adopted the child in 2021, just a few months before they returned to Brazil. Before that, Sophie was under the temporary care of Marina Anderson. The world stopped. Richard felt his legs wobble and had to lean on the table. Marina, his sister Marina. The surname Anderson was his mother's maiden name, which Marina had legally adopted when she turned 18 during a phase of teenage rebellion. "Are you absolutely sure about this information?" His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Absolutely. I have the certificates from Los Angeles. Marina Anderson was the legal guardian of Sophie from 2017 until 2021, when she transferred custody to Lisa Anderson through a legal adoption process." Richard took the certificate with trembling hands. There it was, in black and white, his sister's name. The sister who had disappeared 9 years ago, who had cut off contact with the family, whom they presumed was living her independent life in California. Marina was Sophie's mother. Where is Marina now? The question came out heavy with deep pain and desperate hope. Charles took a deep breath. "Mr. Anderson, I need to be direct with you. Marina Anderson passed away in October 2021 in Los Angeles. Cause of death, late postpartum complications. Apparently, she had serious complications during Sophie's birth that were never fully resolved, and years later developed a widespread infection." The world collapsed. Richard felt himself fall heavily into the chair, reality hitting him like a speeding train. Marina was dead for almost 3 years, and he never knew. He never had the chance to say goodbye, to apologize for the silly fight that had separated them, to meet his niece. "Why didn't she ever contact us?" Richard whispered, more to himself than to Charles. "Why didn't she tell us she had a daughter?" From what I could gather through acquaintances in Los Angeles, Marina was going through a very difficult financial and emotional period. She worked as a freelance researcher in marine biology, but pregnancy prevented her from continuing fieldwork. Apparently, she was very proud and didn't want to ask the family for help. Richard remembered the last conversation with Marina 9 years ago. She had announced that she would be going abroad and might not return. He, always controlling, always thinking he knew what was best for everyone, had said terrible things, that she was irresponsible, that she was running away from her responsibilities, that one day she would regret abandoning the family. Was Lisa Anderson her friend? Richard tried to understand the connection. Best friend since adolescence, Lisa was pursuing a graduate degree in child psychology at NYU when Marina fell seriously ill. In the last months of her life, Marina asked Lisa to take care of Sophie, and they formalized the adoption to ensure the child would have legal security. And why did they come to Brazil? Lisa couldn't support herself financially in the United States after Marina's death, without family there, and with the responsibility of a small child. She decided to return to New York, where she at least had the possibility of starting over. Richard looked out the window, watching the city wake up to another day. His niece. Sophie was his niece, daughter of the Marina he had loved so much and had hurt so deeply. The child who bought muffins with $5 for her adoptive mother's birthday was his own blood. "One last thing, Mr. Anderson," Charles added gently. "According to the records, Marina left a letter for Sophie, which is to be delivered when she turns 18. Lisa is responsible for keeping that letter. I need to meet Lisa. Richard stood up with renewed determination. I need to talk to her. Explain who I am. I can arrange a meeting, but I need to warn you, she is extremely distrustful. She has had bad experiences with men in the past and is in a constant state of protection regarding Sophie. Any approach needs to be very careful. Richard nodded, fully understanding. If he were a single mother protecting a child in a strange city, he would also be suspicious of any man who seemed too interested in his daughter. What is she like, physically, emotionally? Beautiful but tired. The night work and the responsibility of raising a child alone are taking their toll. She is intelligent, holds a degree in psychology, but works in cleaning because that was what she could quickly find when she arrived. She speaks English fluently, and from the neighbors I've spoken to, she is a devoted mother. Richard ran his hands through his hair, trying to process everything. Within hours, he had discovered he had a niece, that his sister had died, and that there was a brave woman raising Marina's daughter, as if she were her own. Charles, I want you to arrange everything for a meeting, but don't say I'm Marina's brother. Not yet. First, I need her to trust me to understand my intentions. Just say I'm a businessman interested in helping an exemplary employee. Understood. But Mr. Anderson, may I make a suggestion? Of course. Take it slow. These two have been through a lot of suffering, and any sudden move could scare them off permanently. Sophie is a bright child, but traumatized by the loss of her biological mother, and Lisa carries a huge emotional burden. Richard nodded, knowing Charles was right. He had spent 9 years mourning the loss of Marina, but now he discovered she had left him the most precious gift, a niece. And no matter how long it took, he would do whatever it took to be part of Sophie's life, to honor his sister's memory, and to repay Lisa for all the generosity she had shown in caring for Marina's daughter. The morning was just beginning, but Richard felt that his true life was about to begin as well. The Green Terrace, one of Richard's most upscale establishments in downtown New York, closed its doors at 2 in the morning on Thursday. It was exactly at that time that the Total Clean team arrived to perform a thorough cleaning of the venue. Richard had. After spending the last 3 days meticulously planning how to approach Lisa without scaring her, he decided that the best strategy would be an apparently casual meeting at her workplace. He parked the Mercedes 2 blocks from the restaurant and walked through the deserted streets of downtown New York. The early morning chill cut across his face, and only a few night workers and homeless people wandered the sidewalks illuminated by yellow streetlights. The distant noise of traffic and the echo of his own footsteps created a melancholic soundtrack for what would be one of the most important moments of his life. As he approached the Green Terrace, Richard spotted a white van parked in front of the establishment. 3 uniformed women were unloading cleaning equipment, methodically organizing themselves for another night of work. One of them, taller and slender, coordinated the group with confident movements and a low voice to avoid disturbing the neighborhood. It was her. Richard recognized Lisa instantly, even though he had never seen her before. There was something familiar in her gestures, in the way she organized her colleagues' work, that reminded him of Emily. Her light brown hair was tied up in a practical bun, and even with the simple navy blue uniform of the company, it was clear that she was a naturally elegant woman. "Good evening," Richard approached slowly, hands in pockets to appear less formal. "Sorry to bother you. I'm Richard Anderson, the owner of this restaurant." The 3 women turned simultaneously, and Richard could see the immediate tension in Lisa's shoulders. Her grey-green eyes quickly assessed him, searching for signs of threat or work-related issues. "Good evening, sir," Lisa replied in a controlled but cordial voice. "Is there a problem with our service? Any complaints?" No, on the contrary." Richard gestured reassuringly. "Actually, I came here to personally thank you. You all do an exceptional job, and I wanted to meet the team responsible for the impeccable cleanliness you maintain in my establishments." The suspicion in Lisa's gaze slightly diminished, but she remained alert. Her colleagues, Mrs. Johnson and Jessica, exchanged curious glances. It was not common for owners to show up in the early morning just to greet the cleaning staff. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Anderson," Lisa continued formally, "but we need to start working. We have a tight schedule to meet." Of course, I don't want to interrupt." Richard realized he needed to be more direct, but without seeming invasive. "Actually, I would like to speak specifically with you, Lisa. Your supervisor told me that you have been an exemplary employee for over 2 years, and I'm considering offering you a growth opportunity." Lisa's eyes sparkled for a moment with a mix of hope and skepticism. "An opportunity?" "Yes. I'm expanding the business and looking for trustworthy people for administrative positions, people who demonstrate responsibility, punctuality, and dedication. From what I've been told, you fit the profile perfectly." Mrs. Johnson discreetly nudged Lisa. "Go on, dear. Talk to the man. We'll start the work and then you can join us." Lisa hesitated, clearly torn between natural distrust and financial need. "Mr. Anderson, I appreciate the interest, but I need to be honest. I have a young daughter, and my availability is limited." "A daughter?" Richard feigned surprise. "How old?" 7 years old, Sophie." The name of the child rolled off Lisa's lips with infinite tenderness. "She studies in the morning, and I need to be home when she gets out of school." "I completely understand. In fact, that shows even more your sense of responsibility." Richard took a deep breath, deciding to take a bit more of a risk. "How about we talk more calmly? Perhaps we can have coffee tomorrow afternoon when you're free. There's a very good bakery nearby, Sweet Delight Bakery." The name of the bakery made Lisa raise her eyebrows. "Sweet Delight Bakery, you know it?" "I do. Why the surprise? My daughter loves going there. Whenever we manage to scrape together some extra money, we buy some treats from Mrs. Johnson." Lisa smiled for the first time, and Richard could see how beautiful she was when she let her guard down. "What an interesting coincidence," Richard smiled back. "So it's a deal? Tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon?" Lisa looked at her colleagues, who encouraged her with their eyes. "All right, but I want to make it clear that any proposal needs to respect my routine with Sophie." "Absolutely. Family always comes first." Richard extended his hand to shake hers. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Lisa." When their hands touched, Richard felt something unexpected. Not only the confirmation that he was doing the right thing, but a genuine connection with this woman who had sacrificed so much for her sister's daughter. Lisa's hands were calloused from work, but firm and warm. "Likewise, Mr. Anderson." Lisa quickly withdrew her hand, returning to a professional posture. "See you tomorrow, then." Richard waved to the 3 women and walked away, feeling his heart racing. During the walk back to the car, he couldn't stop thinking about Lisa's expression when she mentioned Sophie. It was a pure, unconditional love. Exactly how Emily deserved to have her daughter loved. The next day, Richard arrived at Sweet Delight Bakery 15 minutes before the scheduled time. Mrs. Johnson greeted him with a knowing smile. "Mr. Richard, good to see you. And today, earlier than usual." "I have an important meeting today, Mrs. Johnson, with Sophie's mom." The baker's eyes widened. "Really? How did you manage that?" "It's a long story, but tell me one thing. Did they come by today?" "Sophie did, right after school. She bought a chocolate truffle and kept asking if the special uncle's friend had shown up again. Poor thing. I think she got curious about your message." Richard smiled. At least Sophie was interested in meeting him, even if she didn't know who he really was. At exactly 3 o'clock, Lisa entered the bakery. She had changed out of her work uniform into simple jeans and a white blouse, her hair down, framing a face that mixed fatigue and determination. She was even more beautiful in the daylight. "Mr. Anderson," she said. Richard approached the table where he was waiting. "Please, call me Richard, and thank you for coming." He stood up to pull the chair out for her, a gesture that left her slightly surprised. "Thank you." Lisa sat down, observing the surroundings. Sophie loves this place. She always talks about Mrs. Johnson's kindness. "She really is special," Richard agreed, "just like her daughter." Lisa looked directly at him. "Do you know Sophie?" Richard hesitated for just a second. "Actually, yes. I ran into her here a few weeks ago. An impressive child, very mature for her age." "She had to grow up fast," Lisa replied with a subtle sadness. "We've been through some tough times. I can imagine raising a daughter alone can't be easy." Lisa studied Richard carefully, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. "Mr. Richard, can I be direct? What exactly do you want from me?" The raw honesty of the question caught Richard off guard. He realized he was facing an intelligent woman who wouldn't be fooled by vague talk or superficial promises. "The truth is," Richard took a deep breath, "I lost someone very important a few years ago, a family member. And when I saw your daughter at the bakery, something in me awakened, a desire to help, to be part of something good. I know it may sound strange, but sometimes life puts us in the path of people we need to meet." Lisa remained silent for a long moment, analyzing every word. Finally, she whispered, "And what kind of help are you offering?" It was the opening Richard had hoped for, but also the most delicate moment. One wrong word could scare Lisa away forever. "The kind of help that respects your dignity and independence," he replied sincerely. "And that always puts Sophie's well-being first." For the first time, Lisa smiled genuinely, and Richard saw in that smile a distant reflection of Marina. The month of September brought an unexpected routine for Richard Anderson. 3 times a week, he met with Lisa at Sweet Delight Bakery, always respecting the hours she could manage between her night job and caring for Sophie. What had started as a conversation about job opportunities had naturally evolved into more personal dialogues, where both shared stories from their past with careful caution. Richard had offered Lisa an administrative job at one of the restaurants, with flexible hours and a salary 3 times greater than her cleaning job. She accepted, but not without making it clear that she would never accept any favor that compromised her dignity or created non-professional obligations. "Sophie asked about you yesterday," Lisa commented on a rainy Thursday afternoon, absent-mindedly stirring the coffee that was cooling in her cup. "She wants to know why an important man is being so kind to us." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. "And what did you say?" "The truth I know, that sometimes good people come into our lives, and we should be grateful, but always careful." Lisa looked directly at him. "Richard, can I ask a personal question?" "Of course. Why have you never married? A man like you, successful, handsome, it's not natural to be alone at 42. The question hit Richard like a sharp arrow. He had prepared for many conversations, but not for this one. "It's complicated, Lisa. I've had relationships, but I could never fully commit. There was always a barrier, as if a part of me was waiting for something, or someone." "Waiting for what?" Richard hesitated. It was the perfect moment to tell the truth about Marina, about Sophie, about everything. But the fear of losing that fragile connection he had built with Lisa paralyzed him. "Waiting to find a real family," he replied, which wasn't a lie, just incomplete. Lisa nodded slowly, as if she perfectly understood that feeling of emptiness. "Sophie asked me a strange question yesterday. She wanted to know if the special uncle she always mentions could have a brother. Richard's blood ran cold. A brother? Yes. She said you have the same way of furrowing your brow when you're thinking, and that your hands are just like his when he explained about starfish. Lisa tilted her head. Richard, is there something you're not telling me? The moment had come. Richard could feel the weight of the truth pressing on, his chest like a clenched fist. Lisa, I need to tell you something very important, something about the past, about Sophie, about who I really am. Lisa's expression changed instantly. Her posture stiffened, and Richard saw the distrust return to her green eyes. What do you mean? The special uncle that Sophie always mentions was my sister, Marina Anderson. Sophie is my niece. The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa turned pale, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the information. Your sister? Marina was your sister? She was. Marina passed away in October 2021, and I only found out a few weeks ago when I started investigating who Sophie was. Richard leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. Lisa, I didn't know she existed. Marina and I had a falling out 9 years ago, and she cut off contact with me. I never knew she had a daughter. Lisa abruptly stood up, the chair creaking on the wooden floor. You knew, all along you knew who we were and pretended it was a coincidence. No! Richard also stood up, noticing that other people in the bakery were starting to look. I only found out after I met. You please let me explain. Explain what? That you lied from day one, that you approached us pretending to have professional interest? Tears began to stream down Lisa's face. My God, I trusted you. Lisa, please. Richard reached out his hand, but she recoiled. Don't touch me. Sophie was right all along. She always said she felt you were family, and I thought it was a child's fantasy. Lisa grabbed her bag with abrupt movements. Marina told me about you. About how you fought, about the terrible things you said to her before she left. The dagger of guilt pierced Richard's heart. She talked about our fight. She did. In her last days, when she was delirious with fever, she cried, asking for forgiveness from the brother who had rejected her. She said she wanted you to meet Sophie, but she was afraid you would reject her too. Richard felt his legs weaken. Lisa, I was young, stupid. I said things I regret every day of my life. And now you want to redeem yourself by taking care of her daughter? Lisa wiped her tears angrily. You think you can buy forgiveness by offering a job and pretending to be nice? That's not it. I love Sophie. From the first moment I saw her, I knew she was special. And you took care of my sister's daughter like a saint. I'm grateful, infinitely grateful for everything you've done for her. I didn't do it out of gratitude. I did it out of love. Sophie is my daughter as much as she was Emily's, Lisa shouted, drawing even more attention. And now you show up wanting to claim rights over her? I don't want to take Sophie away from you. Never. Richard raised his voice too. You are her mother. I fully acknowledge that. I just want to be part of the family. I want to take care of both of you. Lisa stopped moving, looking at him with a mix of pain and disbelief. Take care of us? Do you think we are charity? That we need a savior? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to control herself. Emily warned me about your arrogance. She said you always thought you knew what was best for everyone, that you always tried to control the people you loved. The words hit Richard like slaps. That was exactly what he had done with Emily 9 years ago, and he was repeating the same pattern. Lisa, please, give me a chance to show that I've changed. You lied to me for weeks. How can I trust anything you say now? Lisa headed for the door. Don't come near us again. Sophie has already suffered too much losing Emily. I won't let you confuse her with false promises of family. And what about Sophie? She has the right to know Emily's family. Lisa stopped at the door, turning one last time. Sophie has the right to a stable life without lies, something you apparently can't offer. Richard watched helplessly as she left the bakery and disappeared into the afternoon rain of New York. Mrs. Johnson approached discreetly, offering a napkin for him to dry the eyes he hadn't even realized were wet. "Mr. Richard, what happened?" "I messed everything up, Mrs. Johnson, just like I messed up with my sister 9 years ago." Richard sat heavily, burying his face in his hands. "I promised myself I would be different this time, but I ended up repeating the same mistakes. Sometimes we need to make mistakes to learn how to get it right next time," she said softly. "But tell me one thing. Do you really love that girl?" "I do. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone I met so recently." "And what about Lisa?" Richard looked up, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "You're in love with her, aren't you? It's not just for Sophie that you want to be part of this family." The revelation hit Richard like lightning. Yes, he was in love with Lisa, with her strength, her dedication, her ability to love unconditionally, but now he had lost any chance of winning her love. "It doesn't matter anymore," he whispered. "She will never forgive me." Never is a very big word, dear. If you really love this family, you'll find a way to prove you deserve a second chance. Richard nodded, knowing that Mrs. Johnson was right. He had lost Emily to pride and stubbornness. He wouldn't lose Sophie and Lisa for the same reasons, no matter how long it took or what he had to do. He would regain their trust, because now he knew that without them, his life would return to being just an empty existence without purpose. The 30 days that followed the revelation in the bakery were the longest and most painful of Richard Anderson's life. He had tried to get close to Lisa and Sophie in every possible way. Flowers sent to their apartment, letters left at the front desk, phone calls to work, but all his attempts were categorically ignored. Lisa had requested a transfer to another shift at the cleaning company and moved Sophie to another school, cutting off any possibility of casual encounters. "Mr. Richard, you need to eat something," insisted Mrs. Carman, his housekeeper for 15 years, watching her boss push another untouched plate away from the breakfast table. "You're losing too much weight, and those dark circles under your eyes are not normal." Richard looked out the window of his apartment in Moema, watching the morning bustle of the city that seemed to carry on normally while his world had crumbled. "I'm not hungry, Carmen, and I haven't slept properly in weeks." "It's because of that woman and the child, isn't it?" Mrs. Carman sat in the chair next to him, something she only did when she was genuinely concerned. "Don't you want to tell me what happened?" Richard took a deep breath. Mrs. Carman knew all his professional secrets, but he had never shared his personal pain with her. Now, however, he felt the need to vent to someone. "I found out I have a niece, Carmen, Emily's daughter." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Emily? But wasn't she in the United States? How did you find out?" "Emily died 3 years ago. She had a daughter who was being raised by a friend here in New York." Richard told the whole story, from the meeting at the bakery to the devastating fight with Lisa. "And now I've lost both of them. The girl must be wondering why I disappeared. And Lisa hates me." Mrs. Carman fell silent, after a few minutes, processing the information. "Mr. Richard, may I ask a question? Why didn't you ask for help? A 7-year-old child trusts women more, especially in delicate situations like this." "What do you mean?" "You are a good man, but sometimes you scare people without realizing it. You are very serious, very formal. A child needs to see kindness, playfulness, lightness." Mrs. Smith leaned forward. "If this Sophie is indeed Mrs. Anderson's daughter, she must have inherited her personality. And Mrs. Anderson always liked people who made her laugh." Richard remembered Emily as a child, always asking him to tell jokes or make funny faces. How had he forgotten that? But now it's too late, Mrs. Smith. Lisa doesn't want to see me anymore, and she has every right. I lied to her from the beginning. You lied because you wanted to protect, not to harm. That makes a difference. Mrs. Smith stood up. But staying here lamenting won't solve anything. If this girl is truly your niece, she deserves to know her biological mother's family. And if Lisa is as good as you say, she will understand that too. That afternoon, Richard made a decision. He went to Sophie's new school and waited on the sidewalk in front, hoping to see her come out. When the gate opened and dozens of children rushed out, he spotted her immediately. Sophie walked slowly, her colourful backpack on her back, quietly chatting with a classmate. "Sophie!" Richard called, keeping a respectful distance. The girl turned around, and her eyes lit up momentarily before becoming confused. "Uncle Richard, why did you disappear? Mom was very sad and cried for many days." Richard's heart shattered. "Sophie, can I talk to you for a minute? Just here on the sidewalk where everyone can see." The girl looked around, noticing other parents picking up children, and nodded. "Okay, but just a little bit. Mom can't be late for work." "Sophie, I need to explain something very important to you." Richard crouched down to her level. "Do you remember the special uncle you always talk about? The one who lived in the house with a rose garden?" "Of course, it was Emily. She was the nicest person in the whole world." Sophie's eyes sparkled with genuine affection. "She taught me about dolphins and starfish." "Why do you ask?" "Emily was my sister, Sophie. I am her brother." Sophie was taken aback, processing the information. "Really? You are Emily's brother? She always said she had a brother she loved very much, but who was mad at her." "It's true, and I regret so much for fighting with her." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. "Sophie, I didn't know you existed. If I had known, I would have rushed to meet you. Emily always said that one day you would meet me and love me very much." Sophie stepped closer and touched Richard's face with her small hand. "She said you had a big heart, but sometimes forgot to show it. Your mom Emily was right. I have a big heart, and it is filled with love for you." Richard gently held the girl's hand. "But your mom Lisa is angry with me because I didn't tell the truth from the beginning." "Why didn't you tell?" "Because I was afraid that you wouldn't want to meet me. Sometimes adults do wrong things and they are scared." Sophie thought for a few seconds. "Mom Lisa is very sad. She cries when she thinks I'm not watching. And she said that maybe we have to move far away from here." Panic took over Richard. "Move? Where to?" "I don't know. To a place where we won't have problems anymore," she said. Sophie sighed like a miniature adult. "But I don't want to leave. I like the new school, and Mrs. Johnson, and you." "Sophie, do you think your mum Lisa would forgive me if I sincerely apologized? If I promised never to lie again?" The girl carefully considered the question. "Mum always teaches me that everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they are sincere. But you would have to be very, very sincere." "I would be. And Sophie, there's something I want to give you." Richard took a small velvet box from his pocket. "This belonged to Emily. She wore it when we were kids." Sophie opened the box and found a delicate silver bracelet with a dolphin-shaped charm. "Is it really from Emily?" "How do you know?" "Because I gave it to her for her 15th birthday. Look, there's an engraving on the back, 'To my dearest sister.'" Sophie read the engraving with difficulty, spelling out each word. When she finished, her eyes were filled with tears. "Can you help me put it on?" Richard fastened the bracelet on Sophie's thin wrist, and in that moment, he felt a deep connection with his niece. It was as if Emily were there, uniting them through that small symbol of sibling love. "Uncle Richard, Can I make a request? Anything, my princess. Can you write a letter to Mom Lisa, explaining everything properly, with drawings too? She likes colourful drawings. Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. That's a great idea, Sophie. Would you help me make that letter? Of course, but now I have to go, or Mum will get worried. Sophie hugged him tightly. Uncle Richard, I already knew you were special. My heart always knew. As he watched Sophie run toward the bus stop where Lisa was waiting, Richard felt a renewed hope growing in his chest. Maybe there was still a chance to regain Lisa's trust, to form the family he so desired. But for that, he would need to be the man Emily always believed he could be. Humble, sincere, and willing to put love above all. Pride. The weekend had arrived, and Richard had spent the last 48 hours crafting the most important letter of his life. Sitting at the kitchen table of his apartment, surrounded by crumpled drafts and colored pencils he had bought especially for the occasion, he was trying to find the perfect words to regain Lisa's trust. Mrs. Smith, what do you think of this drawing? Richard showed a simple illustration of 3 stick figures, a tall man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands in front of a colorful house. The housekeeper adjusted her glasses and smiled tenderly. It's beautiful, Mr. Richard. The little girl will love it. But remember, the letter is for her mother too. You need to show that you understand the pain you caused. Richard nodded, returning to the sheet of handmade paper he had chosen. His neat handwriting, usually reserved for important business documents, now carried a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Dear Lisa, I know I don't deserve your attention after everything that happened, but I beg you to read this letter until the end, not for me, but for Sophie and in memory of Marina. You were right about everything. I lied from our first meeting, and there is no justification for that. I lied because I was too cowardly to risk being rejected again, as happened with Marina 9 years ago. But in trying to protect myself, I hurt the 2 people who matter most to me now. Did Marina tell you about our argument? Then you must know that my last conversation with her was terrible. I told her she was irresponsible, that she was running away from her family obligations. I called her dreams spoiled child's fantasies. Those were the worst words I've ever said to someone I loved. When she left that March morning, I was too proud to run after her. I thought she would come back in a few weeks, apologizing. I never imagined it would be the last time I saw her. For 9 years, I lived with the weight of that guilt. I tried to convince myself that I was right, that Marina needed to grow up. But the truth is, I was afraid of being alone. It had always been just the 2 of us after our parents died, and the idea of her building a life of her own terrified me. So when I met Sophie at the bakery, something in me shattered and rebuilt itself at the same time. It was as if Marina was giving me a second chance to be the family I failed to be for her. Lisa, you cared for my sister's daughter with a love I don't deserve to receive, but for which I will be eternally grateful. You gave Sophie the stable childhood that Marina wanted her to have. You did what I should have done. Put the child's well-being above your own pride. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I think I deserve it. I'm asking because Sophie deserves to know her mother's family. She deserves to know where her strength, intelligence, and capacity to love come from. And she deserves to have uncles, grandparents, even if chosen, cousins, a support network that goes beyond just the 2 of us. If you allow me, I want to be the uncle Sophie needs, not a substitute for a father, because I know you are raising a strong and independent daughter. But someone who tells stories about Marina, who teaches her about her family, who is present in important moments. And if you allow me to dream, I also want to take care of you, not because I think you need care, but because I've discovered that you are an extraordinary woman, and I have fallen in love with the person you are. For your strength, your dedication, your ability to turn any place into a home, I know it sounds crazy to declare this in an apology letter, but I promised Sophie to be completely honest from now on. If you decide to give me a second chance, I promise I will never hide anything again. If you decide that it's better for us to keep our distance, I will respect your decision. But I ask that you allow Sophie to know the story of her biological mother. Enclosed is the will that Marina left, which my investigator managed to locate. She left some things for Sophie: letters to be opened on specific birthdays, some jewelry from our grandmother, and a fund she managed to save in her last years. There is also an album of photos from our childhood and youth, so Sophie can see what Marina was like as a child. There is an impressive resemblance between them. Lisa, you don't need to decide anything now, but if you ever want to try again, I will be waiting. And if Sophie wants to see the country house where Marina played, where there is a rose garden she loved, the doors will always be open. With all my love and regret, Richard P.S. Sophie helped me choose the colors for the drawings. She said you like rainbows, so I tried to include all the colors I could find. Richard sealed the letter in a handmade paper envelope, along with copies of Marina's will and a small photo album he had put together especially for Sophie. He also included a golden key in a little box, the key to the country house in Lakeview, where Marina had been happiest. On Monday morning, instead of delivering it personally, Richard asked Mrs. Smith to take the correspondence. "Women trust other women more," she had said, and Richard knew she was right. Mrs. Smith returned 2 hours later with red eyes. "Mr. Richard, I managed to talk to Lisa. She was at the playground with Sophie when I arrived. And what did she say? At first, she was angry that I showed up there. But when I explained that it was just to deliver a letter and that Sophie insisted she read it, she accepted." Mrs. Smith sat down. "Mr. Richard, that woman is suffering a lot. You can see that she cares about you, but she's afraid of being hurt again. And Sophie? The little girl is too smart. She kept asking if I was family of Uncle Richard, and when I confirmed, she hugged me. My legs, and said she was happy because now she had a borrowed grandma." Richard smiled sadly. Sophie continued trying to build a family, even after everything that had happened. "Mrs. Smith, now we just have to wait." "Not just wait, Mr. Richard, pray too, so that her heart is stronger than the fear." The next 3 days were a silent torture. Richard cancelled meetings, ignored important calls, and spent most of his time looking out the window, waiting for a sign, a call, anything that indicated that Lisa had read the letter. On Thursday, when he was losing hope, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Uncle Richard?" Sophie's sweet voice made his heart race. "Mom wants to talk to you." "Sophie? How did you get my number?" "It's in the letter you sent, duh. Mom read it about 15 times and cried every time. I think she liked your apologies." Richard heard rustling on the phone as it was passed, and then Lisa's voice, softer than he had heard in weeks. "Richard?" "Lisa, did you read the letter?" "I did, several times." Her voice was choked. "I need to see you. Can we meet at Sweet Delight Bakery tomorrow at 3? Sophie insists on coming along." "Of course, anywhere, anytime." "Richard, thank you for being honest." Finally, when the call ended, Richard felt as if he could breathe fully for the first time in a month. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still hope for the family he so desperately wanted to build. Friday afternoon at Sweet Delight Bakery had a different atmosphere. Mrs. Johnson had prepared a special table in the coziest corner of the bakery, adorned with a small lace tablecloth and a vase of wildflowers. She knew, by maternal intuition, that this meeting would be crucial for the 3 people she hoped would be happy. Richard arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a light blue dress shirt that Mrs. Smith had specially chosen. "Softer and more fatherly," she had said. His hands trembled slightly when Mrs. Johnson served him the usual coffee. "You're nervous, aren't you, dear?" she commented with a warm smile. But you can relax. True love always finds a way. At 3 o'clock sharp, the bakery door opened, and Sophie rushed in, followed by Lisa, who walked more slowly, visibly nervous. The girl wore the silver bracelet that Richard had given her, and her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Uncle Richard!" Sophie ran straight to him, and he lifted her in a tight hug. "I missed you so much. Mom said you wrote the most beautiful letter in the whole world." "Really?" Richard looked over Sophie's head at Lisa, who was approaching slowly. She looked different, more fragile but also more determined. Her loose hair framed a face that showed signs of sleepless nights, but also a new resolve. "Hi, Richard," Lisa said softly, and in those two words he heard a universe of forgiveness and hope. "Hi, Lisa. Thank you for coming, for giving us this chance." Sophie settled into the chair between the two adults, naturally, taking on the role of mediator. "Mom, tell Uncle Richard about the photos of Emily." Lisa smiled for the first time in weeks. "The photos you sent." Richard. Sophie was fascinated. She spent the whole morning comparing her expressions with those of little Emily. They really look a lot alike. "Emily was always stubborn and determined, just like Sophie," Richard commented, watching the girl play with the bracelet. "And she had the same way of furrowing her brow when she was focused." "That's true," Sophie laughed. "And look!" She opened a small backpack and took out some of the photos Richard had sent. "This one of Emily at 7 looks just like me, only she was in a really big house with a garden." "That's the country house of the family in Lakeview," Richard explained. "Emily loved spending weekends there. She personally took care of the rose bushes." Lisa leaned in to examine the photo. "Sophie always said she wanted to see Emily's rose garden. She said it was the most beautiful place in the world." "And it still is," Richard said softly. "And you two are welcome to go there whenever you want." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable but reflective. Sophie continued studying the photos while the adults assessed each other, trying to rebuild the lost trust. "Richard," Lisa began, her voice careful, "I read your letter many times, and I also read Emily's will. And what did you think? She really loved you. In the letters she left for Sophie, Emily talks a lot about the brother who had a heart too big for his own good. She always believed you would reconcile." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. "And I wasted 9 years believing she hated me." "She never hated you. Emily always said, you were too protective, but that was because you loved deeply." Lisa gently touched his hand across the table. "Richard, I also made mistakes. I should have asked about your family when you mentioned losing someone important. Maybe if I had been more open—" "No," Richard interrupted. "The blame was entirely mine. You were protecting Sophie, doing exactly what a good mom should do." Sophie, who had been listening attentively, suddenly stood up and hugged both adults simultaneously. "No more sadness. Emily wouldn't want us fighting. She wanted us to be a happy family." Mrs. Johnson, who had been watching discreetly from a distance, couldn't help but smile with emotion. "This girl is too wise for her age," she murmured to herself. "Sophie is right," Lisa said, wiping away a tear. "Emily always said life is too short to waste time on grudges." "So," Richard took a deep breath, "can we try again, slowly, respecting your time, but trying to build something together?" Lisa looked at Sophie, who nodded vigorously, and then back at Richard. "Yes, we can try, but with some conditions. Anything. First, total honesty from now on. If something bothers you, you speak up. If you're afraid of something, share it with us. I promise. Second, Sophie remains my daughter. You can be the wonderful uncle she deserves, but the important decisions about her education and upbringing go through me." "Absolutely. And Lisa, I want you to know that I deeply admire what you did for her. You're an extraordinary mom." Sophie clapped her hands. "And third condition, we are going to visit the country house next weekend. I want to see Emily's rose garden." The adults laughed, and for the first time in weeks, the sound was genuine and relaxed. "That can be arranged," Richard smiled. "In fact, there's something special I want to show you there." "What is it?" Sophie asked curiously. "Emily planted a special rose bush when she turned 18, a white rose that she named Hope. She always said that when she had children, she would teach them that the most beautiful roses grow after the harshest winters." Lisa felt her heart tighten. Did she really know she would have children? Emily always had a special intuition about the future, and I think she knew that, one way or another, the three of us would end up together. Mrs. Johnson approached with a special tray, 3 muffins decorated with small sugar roses and a star-shaped candle. "What is this, Mrs. Johnson?" Sophie asked delightedly. "A fresh start muffin for each of you," she explained tenderly. "And the candle is for you to make a wish together." Sophie looked at Richard and Lisa. "Can we wish for the same thing?" "Of course, Princess. What do you want to wish for?" "That we become a real family, and that Emily, up in heaven, is happy seeing us together." Richard and Lisa exchanged a look filled with emotion. Together, the three blew out the candle. And for the first time in years, Richard felt complete. The fresh start wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. And for a family that had found each other through pain, that was all that mattered. The autumn of May arrived with its cool mornings and golden afternoons, painting the country house in Lakeview with colours that seemed to have come from an impressionist painting. Richard had spent 2 weeks meticulously preparing every detail for Sophie and Lisa's first visit to the property that held Emily's most precious memories. The rose garden was impeccable. The house had been aired, out and cleaned, and he even hired a landscaping team to restore the wooden swing where Emily used to read in the late afternoons. "Uncle Richard, is this where Emily used to play?" Sophie jumped out of the car before it even came to a complete stop, her eyes wide in front of the cozy country house with its white walls and blue windows framed by flowering vines. "Exactly here, Princess." Richard got out of the vehicle and watched Lisa, who remained standing, clearly emotional. "Lisa, are you okay?" "It's just that Emily described this place in her last days. She said she wanted to bring Sophie here to teach her about the roses, about family, about roots." Lisa wiped away a discreet tear. "It's as if she was guiding us here." Sophie ran toward the garden, stopping in awe in front of the rose bush that Richard had mentioned. "Is this Emily's hope? It's the most beautiful of all." "Yes, Sophie. And look." Richard knelt beside her, pointing to a small bronze plaque buried at the base of the rose bush. "Emily left a message here." Sophie read aloud, carefully spelling out the words, "To my daughter who has not yet been born. May you grow up knowing that true love always blooms, even after the harshest winters, with all my eternal love. Mum Emily." The silence that followed was broken only by the chirping of birds and the gentle whisper of the wind through the leaves. Lisa approached and hugged Sophie from behind, both contemplating that message of love that had crossed time. "Uncle Richard," Sophie whispered, "can I talk to Emily here? I think she can hear me better near her rose bush." "Of course you can, my love. This has always been a special place for important conversations." As Sophie settled on the grass next to the rose bush, starting a whispered conversation with her biological mother, Richard and Lisa walked toward the terrace of the house. The afternoon sun created a play of light and shadows over the valley, and the tranquility of the place contrasted sharply with the urban hustle of New York. "Richard," Lisa began, leaning on the wooden railing, "I need to tell you something I discovered in the letters Emily left for Sophie." "What is it?" Richard felt a pang of anxiety. Emily knew she was sick before Sophie was born. The doctors had said that the pregnancy was high risk, that she might not survive. Lisa took a deep breath. She chose to have Sophie anyway, and spent the last 4 years of her life preparing everything so that her daughter would be well cared for. Is that why she asked you to legally adopt Sophie? Exactly, and in the letters, she talks a lot about you. About how she missed you, about how she wanted Sophie to know the uncle who taught about the world with infinite patience, and who protected those he loved with the strength of a lion. Richard leaned on the railing, emotional. Did she really write that? She did, and more. Emily left specific instructions on how she wanted Sophie to be raised. She wanted her daughter to know the family traditions, to learn about the country house, to know the stories of her grandparents. She practically drew a map for you to be part of Sophie's life. And why didn't you tell me this before? Lisa hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because I was afraid you would want to take Sophie away from me. Emily always said you were too protective, and I feared you would think I wasn't good enough. Enough to raise her daughter. Richard turned to Lisa, taking her hands in his. Lisa, look at me. You are more than good enough. You are perfect. Emily chose you because she knew you would love Sophie unconditionally, that you would make any sacrifice for her. I would never try to separate you. Tears streamed down Lisa's cheeks. It's just that I love her so much, Richard. When Emily died, I promised I would be the best mom possible for Sophie, but sometimes I feel so alone, so insecure about the decisions I make. You don't have to be alone anymore, Richard whispered, wiping her tears with his thumb. If you let me, I want to share this responsibility with you. I want us to be a real family. Uncle Richard, Mum Lisa. Sophie came running from the garden, interrupting the intimate moment. Come see, Emily showed me something amazing. Intrigued, the adults followed the girl to a part of the garden that was partially hidden behind a hedge of jasmine. There, Sophie had discovered a small wooden structure that looked like a little house. It's a tree house, Sophie shouted with joy. And there's a letter hanging on the door. Richard approached, immediately recognizing Emily's handwriting on the yellowed envelope. For Sophie, on the day you find our secret house. It was written in his sister's delicate handwriting. You can open it, Sophie, Lisa encouraged. With trembling hands of emotion, Sophie unfolded the letter and began to read. My dear Sophie, if you are reading this, it means you have finally arrived at our special country house and found the place where I loved to dream when I was a child. This tree house was built by your Uncle Richard when I was 8 years old, because I said I wanted a little corner of my own to talk to the stars. Inside the little house, you will find some treasures I saved for you. The diary where I wrote all the stories I wanted to tell you, a collection of shells I brought from my research trips, and a very special photo of me and your uncle when we were little and still didn't know that sometimes we argue with those we love the most. Sophie, I want you to know that I carefully chose each person who would be part of your life. Your mum Lisa has a heart as big as the ocean, and your Uncle Richard has the strength and kindness you will need to grow up feeling safe and loved. Be happy, my little girl. Make this country house your second home, and know that whenever you look at the roses, I will be very close taking care of you. With all my infinite love, Mom Emily. Sophie finished reading with teary eyes and threw herself into the arms of Richard and Lisa simultaneously. She knew. Emily knew that you both would love and take care of me together. Lisa looked at Richard over Sophie's head, and in that moment they both understood that Emily had orchestrated everything. Every meeting, every coincidence, every moment of pain and reconciliation had been part of a larger plan to bring together those three people who needed each other. Richard, Lisa whispered, I think Emily is giving us her blessing. I think so too, he replied, gently kissing Sophie's forehead, and I think it's time we truly honor her wish. What do you mean? Richard stepped back slightly, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Lisa Christina Anderson, will you marry me? Not just to form a family for Sophie, but because I have fallen deeply in love with you and can't imagine my life without both of you. Sophie jumped for joy, clapping her hands. Say yes, Mum. Say yes. Lisa looked at the treehouse, at Emily's roses, at radiant Sophie, and at Richard kneeling in front of her. Somewhere between tears and laughter she whispered, Yes, Richard, yes to everything, to the marriage, to the family, to the love that Emily always knew existed between us. When Richard placed the ring on Lisa's finger, a gentle breeze made the rose petals dance around them, as if Emily was celebrating alongside them, finally seeing her family united by the love she always believed was possible. 2 years later, the garden of the country house in Lakeview had never been as radiant as it was that December morning. The hope roses had multiplied, creating a lush flower bed that filled the air with its sweet and delicate fragrance. The house, which once held only silent memories, now echoed with laughter, conversations, and the constant sound of small footsteps running through the wooden hallways. Richard adjusted the knot of his navy blue tie for the 10th time, watching in the bedroom mirror the movement in the garden, where dozens of guests were settling into white chairs arranged in a semicircle around Emily's rosebush. It was the day of the official wedding. They had already been living as a family for over a year, but Sophie had insisted they needed a real party where everyone could officially celebrate their union. "Dad, Richard, you look very handsome." Sophie burst into the room like a whirlwind of pink tulle and smiles. At 9 years old, she had grown and matured, but still had that unique ability to light up any room with her presence. Her curly hair was styled in an elaborate updo with small white roses, and she wore the silver bracelet, now accompanied by a delicate necklace that had belonged to Emily's great-grandmother. "Thank you, Princess, and you look absolutely beautiful. Is Mom Lisa ready?" "She is. She's crying a little, but she said it's out of happiness." Sophie moved closer to the window. "Dad, look at how many people came. There are people from the restaurants, Mrs. Johnson with her whole family, those friends of Emily who came from far away." Richard joined her at the window, watching the garden full of life. It was just as Emily had dreamed when she was a child. A celebration surrounded by loved ones, in the place she loved most in the world. "Sophie, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you feel that Emily is here with us today?" Sophie considered the question with the seriousness she always dedicated to important matters. "I think she never left here, Dad. Sometimes, when I'm playing in the treehouse, I feel like she's sitting next to me, telling stories about when you were little and making art." Richard laughed, remembering the mischief he really did to get Emily's attention. "And what else does she say?" "That she always knew you were a perfect dad, you just needed to find the right family to take care of." Sophie hugged him, "And that she was so proud when you learned to braid my hair." "Mrs. Smith taught me," Richard confessed, laughing. "It took me 3 months to learn to make a decent braid." The door opened gently, and Mrs. Smith entered, carrying a small bouquet of white roses. "Mr. Richard, it's time. And, Sophie, your mom is ready to come down." Richard's heart raced. After 2 years living with Lisa and Sophie, after hundreds of mornings waking up next to the woman he loved, and dozens of nights helping Sophie with homework, he still felt butterflies in his stomach when he thought about how his life had completely transformed. "I'll go first, Dad. I need to throw the petals." Sophie ran out, leaving a trail of laughter down the hallway. 5 minutes later, Richard walked through the garden towards the makeshift altar under the old jabuticaba tree, where he and Emily used to climb as children. The officiant, a family friend who had baptized Emily, smiled warmly as the guests stood up. Mrs. Johnson wiped happy tears with an embroidered handkerchief. The restaurant staff applauded discreetly, and in the front row, Mrs. Smith held a framed photo of Emily so she could watch everything up close. Soft violin and cello music echoed through the garden, and all heads turned towards the entrance of the house. Sophie appeared first, throwing rose petals with almost mathematical precision, ensuring the path was perfectly flowered. Her radiant smile lit up everyone present. And then Lisa appeared. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. She wore a simple white silk dress, understated, that highlighted her natural beauty. Her light brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and she carried a bouquet of hope roses that she had personally picked that morning. But what impressed him most was the sparkle in her eyes, a pure and genuine happiness he never imagined he could awaken in someone. Lisa walked slowly through the garden, greeting with affectionate glances the guests who had become part of her new extended family. When she reached the altar, Richard took her hand and whispered, "You look even more beautiful than the day we met at the bakery. And you are even more nervous," she replied with a mischievous smile. The ceremony was intimate and emotional. The officiant spoke about families that are formed not just by blood, but by love and the conscious choice to walk together. Sophie actively participated, exchanging the rings and giving a small speech she had secretly prepared. "Emily always told me that the best families are those that choose each other every day. Dad Richard chose me to be his daughter at heart. Mom Lisa chose me to be her real daughter, and I chose both of them to be my parents forever. And I'm sure Emily is here, choosing to bless us with so much love." There were no dry eyes in the garden when she finished speaking. When the officiant pronounced the traditional phrase, "You may kiss the bride," Richard and Lisa kissed gently, while Sophie hugged their legs, and the guests applauded in an explosion of joy. At that moment, an unexpected breeze caused hundreds of rose petals to fall upon the trio, creating a fragrant rain that seemed to come directly from the sky. "Emily sent confetti!" Sophie shouted with joy, spinning with her arms wide open to catch as many petals as possible. The party that followed was just as it should be, filled with music, delicious food prepared by Richard's restaurant team, funny stories told by Mrs. Johnson about encounters at the bakery, and lots of dancing on the lawn illuminated by Christmas lights. During the cake cutting, a 3-tier chocolate cake decorated with sugar roses, Sophie insisted on saving the first piece on a special plate. "It's for Emily," she explained naturally, placing the plate under the hope rose bush. When night fell and the last guests departed, Richard, Lisa, and Sophie sat on the wooden swing he had restored, contemplating the garden illuminated by the full moon. Sophie had insisted on keeping her party dress, but she was barefoot, with her feet swinging in the air. "Dad Richard, Mom Lisa," she suddenly said, "can I make a wish?" "Anything, sweetheart," Lisa replied, snuggling Sophie between her and Richard. "I want us to come here every weekend. I want to plant more flowers. I want to take care of the treehouse. I want this place to always be our family's special corner." "We promise," Richard said, kissing the top of Sophie's curly head. "This place will always be ours." Lisa nestled into Richard's shoulder, watching Sophie gradually fall asleep between them. "You know what? I think I finally understand what Emily meant when she talked about love blooming after harsh winters." "What do you mean?" "We all go through tough times. You losing Emily, me raising Sophie alone, her dealing with the absence of her biological mom. But it was exactly that pain that prepared us to recognize and cherish love." True, when he finally arrived, Richard contemplated the hope rose bush, which even in the darkness exuded its characteristic fragrance. "Emily was always the wisest of us too. I think she knew that one day we would be here, just like this." "I'm sure she did," Lisa agreed. "And I think she's proud of the family we've built." Sophie murmured something unintelligible in her sleep, a smile still playing on her lips. Richard carefully picked her up, and the three of them went up to the house, where 3 bedrooms awaited them, a couple who had found true love, and a girl who finally had the complete family she had always dreamed of. That night, while putting away Lisa's wedding dress and arranging it on the bed next to Sophie, who had insisted on sleeping with her parents, Richard looked out the window at the moonlit garden. For a moment, he was sure he saw a feminine figure sitting on the swing, gently waving in his direction. "Thank you, Emily," he whispered to the night. "Thank you for giving us each other." The night breeze made the curtains dance softly, like a final farewell caress, and Richard knew that his sister was finally at peace, knowing that his daughter would grow up surrounded by the unconditional love she had always wanted Sophie to have. The circle was complete. The family was finally reunited.